And then, so that completes our action items and our discussion item. I'd like to introduce Isaac Wakefield. He's from Salzman Hughes. Hi, hello, Mr. Wakefield. We also have Diane Bosek as well, as Mr. Thompson alluded to, the executive director of the PMBA is with us here tonight. So thank you very much, and we look forward to the presentation.
Let me get the screen share.
Okay.
If you just want to tell me when you want me to advance.
You can go ahead to the first slide. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here this evening. I'm just going to do a little quick overview of who PMEA is. So you have a little bit a better sense of us. We are the Pennsylvania Municipal Electric Association. As Bob indicated, the association reorganized in 2019, and I came on board in September of 2019. And we basically serve the 35 Pennsylvania boroughs that provide electricity in their communities. As Mr. Thompson mentioned, they're spread throughout the state. We have some clusters southeast and in the north and that, but we have they're spread around, and there are 35. And as an association, we do a number of things for the boroughs. Obviously, advocacy is important. So we do work on legislative issues at the state and federal level. Some of those things right now include, the increases in light heat funding, electric vehicles. I'm sure you've heard a lot. There's a lot of activity at the state and at the federal level on those. The climate and infrastructure things that are being discussed both at the state and federal levels right now, and even to pole attachments, considering that the poles are ours, so we have a bit more concern than in some other municipalities. We also serve as a resource for our members, and that is when there are specific issues, and let's say Ephrata has something and they want to know how other communities are handling it. We are that resource, and we work with the other members to sort of pull that information together. And then we also do things like an annual rate survey. We've done a personnel survey, so we do things like that. We also do training and events for our members. We're developing right now a training program for the second half of this year for our line crews. We'll have a finance symposium in July. This will be our second annual one. And then, of course, the PMEA annual conference is back in person this year after our virtual last year. And we also provide information to our members during the peak of the COVID pandemic. We were sending out regular updates to our members, things that they needed to know, availability of PPE, those kinds of things. And we also produce a newsletter for our members. Bob, you can go ahead and change that. And then just a quick thing, again, the 35 municipalities serve more than 81,000 customers and more than 166,000 residents. We reinvest the money that's generated back into our communities in numbers of ways. It's totally as each community determines. And then, the property taxes in PMEA member communities are lower. And then just because we are here, we are more responsive when there are outages and emergencies. And we're able to reinvest in the infrastructure. I have a little typo there. To reinvest in the infrastructure, to try to keep it viable and current. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Isaac for his share, unless anybody has any questions. Okay, thank you.
You can go forward one there. Back one if you would. Good evening, everybody. My name is Isaac Wakefield. I'm an attorney with Saltzman Hughes. We are a regional law firm here in central Pennsylvania. We have offices in Harrisburg, Carlisle, Chambersburg, and Gettysburg, to name a few. We represent a number of municipalities and local government units in a variety of capacities, both as solicitor and as special counsel. And this evening, we're privileged to be here as the solicitor to PMEA. We do provide advice to PMEA as an association, but also to the member municipalities, particularly where there are particular items of interest, such as we're going to discuss tonight. Other than that, we have a wide range of services that we offer, and the subject matter ranges pretty much anything that touches and concerns municipal government. That's our bailiwick. So that's our basis of expertise. You can go forward one there, Bob. So we were asked to come talk tonight to you about net metering, and in particular how municipal electrics or borough electrics handle net metering, or more specifically what regulatory constructs apply to you and what is permissible and may not be permissible in terms of your service and in terms of your rates. And so we're going to talk really specifically about net metering. I'll go through some background, some slides here. We can have a question and answer or discussion at the end. If you have questions as it come up, feel free to let me know. But basically, background, statutory and regulatory framework for net metering. It is a concept that applies largely in the context of investor-owned utilities. In 2004, the General Assembly enacted the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards Act, or the AEPS Act. The goal of the AEPS Act, as a note on the slide there, is to incentivize alternative energy producers to generate their own energy using alternate energy production methods, and then to sell that extra to electric distribution companies. Stated simply, it's make a meter run backwards. This is the definition of net metering from the AEPS Act, the means of measuring the difference between the electricity supplied by an electric utility and the electricity generated by a customer generator, for example, someone who has rooftop solar, or perhaps something on a larger scale. When any portion of that electricity generated by that customer is used to offset part of the customer generator's requirements. Again, colloquially, make the meter run backwards. It can involve just offsetting the consumption, or it can involve actually selling power back into the grid. So it's a little bit of both. The Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards Act also required the Public Utility Commission to enact a number of regulations, which it did subsequently. Those regulations govern the criteria and the technical requirements largely for eligibility to participate in net metering when an investor-owned utility is involved, and when the PUC's regulations do control. What we saw after the enactment of the AEPS Act, as well as the regulations, was a proliferation of case law interpreting the AEPS Act's provisions and the regs, and in some instances determining whether or not the Commission, in creating those regulations, had overstepped the authority granted to it by the legislature to do so. You can go to one slide there. So, baseline question: who does the AEPS Act and the regulations that PUC enacted control? Who do they apply to? And simply stated, really it's two different types of entities. One is an electric distribution company, or what is commonly referred to as an EDC, as defined in the Public Utility Code. And the second is an electric generation supplier, or an EGS, also as defined in the Public Utility Code. And I'll take a few minutes to go through each of those in turn and talk about how they may apply to the borough as we go forward here. An EDC is defined in the Public Utility Code as a public utility, which is the critical language, a public utility, providing facilities for the jurisdictional transmission and distribution of electricity to retail customers. So the operative language there being public utility. EDCs, under the Act, under the regulations, are required to offer net metering to their customers. It's a mandatory obligation that those investor-owned utilities have. An EGS is defined in the Public Utility Code as a person or corporation, which includes a municipal corporation, but only a municipal corporation that chooses to provide service beyond its municipal limits, something that we refer to as extraterritorial service. And then who sells to end users electricity and related services using distribution facilities, and so on and so forth. EGSs, unlike EDCs, are not obligated to provide net metering. They may do so, but they do not have the same mandatory obligation as an EDC does. So remember that we're talking about EDCs, public utilities, and EGSs, which are non-public utilities, persons or corporations, and in some instances, municipal entities. You can go forward one block. So, the PUC's jurisdiction and the application of the act and the regs to boroughs. Because I think that's kind of what everybody's most curious about, in particular, whether the borough must comply with what's out there for EDCs, what's out there for what the Public Utility Commission says, and so on. So, number one, a borough electric is not an EDC. It is not an electric distribution company, primarily because a borough is not a public utility. So unlike an investor-owned utility, you're all familiar with the borough electric, you know how you run, you know how the system is owned. It is not an investor-owned utility, it's not an EDC. So there's no obligation on the borough to provide net metering services because it's a public utility or an EDC, or to structure its net metering program in a certain way. It's also, in this instance, not an EGS. And the reason for that is because while you may be a municipal corporation, the extraterritorial element is not there. You provide services, as I understand it, within your corporate boundaries, and therefore you don't have that same reach beyond your municipal boundaries. That's not unique, anecdotally, to electric either. We see the PUC reach out and regulate municipal entities in the provision of a number of municipal utility services when they do so beyond the boundaries of the municipality. That can be water, that can be sewer, and in this case, electric. The baseline reason for that is that those who exist beyond the corporate boundaries, who are your retail customers, they don't have the same power of the ballot box that your other ratepayers do, who are your citizens and have the ability to vote for all of you, or to not vote for all of you, or to campaign for their own position on the board. So we see a lot of circumstances where extraterritorial customers are involved, and that will potentially bring someone, I should say, under the umbrella of the PUC's jurisdiction, or in the case of electric, being treated as an EGS. One other thought I had on that was if you are providing extraterritorial service, which I understand this entity is not, there are instances where the Public Utility Commission will still say, we're not going to exercise our jurisdiction because there's not enough retail customers on the other side of your boundary. Okay, so even if you were, there's a possibility that it wouldn't apply anyway. Tellingly, the last point there on the slide, the PUC has already said that Ephrata Borough is not subject to its jurisdiction. Now, it was not a net metering case, as you may all be familiar with this. I was not until I happened to revisit it. But in Wisniewski versus Borough of Ephrata, there was a complainant, a pro se complainant, who wanted to choose his own electric generation supplier, his own EGS, and filed a formal complaint with the PUC. And the borough fought back against that and contested it. And in what is relatively unique circumstances, the PUC granted preliminary objections at sort of the outset of the case. Typically, when you have a pro se complainant who comes in, files a formal complaint with the PUC won't be quick to deprive the pro se complainant of their ability to make their case, or to at least have a hearing. And in this particular instance, the PUC felt strongly enough to say, no, from the outset, we know we don't have jurisdiction over the service or the rates that are being discussed or at issue in that case. So you already have precedent here to understand that the PUC does not have control, as it presently sits, over your rates or your service, including your net metering.
So what is Ephrata Borough? It's not an EDC, it's not an EGS, it's considered a municipal corporation?
Yes,
so there's no electric, PUC is not in charge of us. Who is?
Oh, I'll go forward and I'll get there. All right, so as this lady pointed out here, what you are is a municipal corporation. When you look at the definitions within the Public Utility Code and who's regulated, you are a municipal corporation. So if you were a municipal corporation that fell under one of the instances where the PUC does have jurisdiction, or you must comply with their regs, you would be subject to that. But as it stands now, you don't. So go ahead, one forward there. So just to wrap up what we just discussed, is the borough subject to the AEPS Act or the commission's regulations on it? The answer is no, at least as it stands now. Must this borough, when it has interconnection or net metering programs, rates, rules, and regs, do those have to be the same as they would be if it was an investor-owned utility like a PPL or MedEd or whoever? Again, the answer is no, because the PUC doesn't control, and we don't meet the requirements of those acts. So, the question that was asked earlier, what are the limits on the borough's design and implementation of interconnection rates?
Could I just say something here? If the borough is with APS or AEPS and some other things, why does PURPA and FERC even exist in the government? If you didn't have to do these things, why do those government agencies exist?
Why does FERC exist?
Or PURPA for that matter?
Because there are entities that do have to provide those services and are regulated.
But not a municipal organization?
A municipal corporation.
Would it be fair to say a municipal corporation could be considered a horizontal monopoly?
I'm not sure how to answer that question because I don't know what you mean by horizontal monopoly.
Well, a monopoly, where somebody doesn't have to listen to somebody, they can make their own
Okay,
rules.
I'll tell you what, let me go through
Can we
the.
go through the presentation?
Yeah.
I'd like to have the presentation complete.
I just wanted to comment.
I'll open up questions.
Then we can have questions and answers.
Right.
Because it disrupts everything if we can't get a continuation of the presentation. Thank you.
You can go forward while they're going. All right. So, AEPS Act doesn't apply. PUC's regulations don't apply. What does? Well, the boroughs, as you are well aware, are in a very unique position in Pennsylvania as the only municipal corporation or municipal type of entity that can own and operate borough electric systems. The borough code is obviously very specific on that, and the salient provisions here are quoted for you. Specifically, the borough may manufacture or purchase electricity for the use of its inhabitants. Boroughs are empowered to regulate the use and the charge for electricity furnished by the borough for use throughout the borough. And perhaps most importantly, or most critically, the last provision here, a borough may fix, establish, maintain, and collect, or authorize by contract or otherwise, the establishment, levying, and collection of rates, fees, rentals, or other charges. I'll give you an ellipses, ... for the services afforded by or in connection with the properties which the borough constructs or owns, etc., as it deems necessary, proper, desirable, and reasonable. Bob, can you go forward? So when we're talking about constraints on the borough, the constraint on the borough is the authorization granted to you in the borough code. There's a governing principle in all municipal law, which is that municipal entities, including boroughs, have only those authority or those powers granted to them by the General Assembly, by the legislature. So in this instance, what the General Assembly has said is you can generate, you can transmit, you can create your rates, but the requirement is that all of that be necessary, proper, desirable, and reasonable. Absent compliance with that, you're good to go in terms of your rate structure or the service that you're providing. I can tell you anecdotally from having a lot of experience with dealing with municipal rate setting, that in the context of municipal rate setting, the municipalities are granted by the courts a wide-ranging discretion. As long as you have some sort of reasonable support for your rates, whether in the form of an expert opinion or a rate study ideally, which you do have in this instance in support of your rates, a court would be remiss to disturb your rates. And again, absent some sort of legislative change to the borough code, which again, having experience with just doing one of those last year, it's a task to get that done. This is the standard that you're going to be dealing with. Is the service that you're providing and are the rates you're providing reasonable? And that provides you with a wide berth of discretion in how you do that. So in summary, the PUC does not have jurisdiction over the service and rates that this borough has in place. Doesn't. The AEPS Act does not constrain the borough in how it sets its rates for services. The commission's regulations at this point do not. The only things that would change that are changes to the underlying statutes or a circumstance where something about your service changed where you were providing extraterritorial service. And even in those instances, usually the commission's only going to have jurisdiction over regulating the extraterritorial service itself, meaning the service that you're providing to those ratepayers. You can go to the next slide there, Rob. So that's, you went one too far, I think. I have a slide that says questions. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. In a way, there is no straight answer other than that your service and your rates have to be reasonable. You don't have the strictures placed on you that investor-owned utilities do. So in your case, you have rates that were set through a deliberative process involving a rate study. And it's my generalized understanding and opinion that those rates as they exist today are reasonable and would be defensible. So before full discussion, are there questions from the
Yeah,
board?
I'll go with my committee members first. Mr. Richard, Mr. Reynolds, do you have any questions?
That was very interesting presentation.
That was very good too, it was very straightforward. Any other council members have any questions?
Thank you for the presentation.
Wendy, can I make one
Yeah,
comment
of
before we
course,
go
yes,
there?
please.
So, the question was asked about who do we report to? Okay, well, you report to borough council members. Borough council members establish the rates and the rules for the operation of the borough facilities. And if there are issues associated with that are not consistent with what the public considers reasonable, then their choice is when they go to the ballot boxes. On the flip side of that is, and then Diane mentioned that in her two slides, is that the one thing about public power is you have access to all the decision makers. When you come to a borough council meeting, you have access to the decision makers. At the same time, you know that public power is reliable. You know that public power is operated and maintained by people that live in this community. And if you go back, if you can remember back to the polar vortex, I think it was 2014, many of the communities that were receiving electricity in Pennsylvania, their boards were in Florida or Texas. So they did not have access, customers did not have access to the board members as you have here in Ephrata. So I just like to put that out.
And Bob, to that point, I wasn't on council then, but didn't we forgive a lot of the sort of the debt that was incurred because of the polar vortex and the meter reading and things like that? I mean, there was a lot of things that we did for the customer. If I'm not mistaken.
Well, the borough incurred about $656,000 of additional costs because of the polar vortex.
Right.
And the borough council decided that this was considered an emergency situation, and as a result, they paid for that additional $656,000 out of fund balance and did not pass that cost on to the customers, as you would have read the boards in Florida and Texas may have done for the IOUs.
An investor or own organization could have done the same thing, not
Correct.
pass that on.
Correct.
So I think that's important to note too. Are there any other questions we have? Mr. Shirley?
So, and this, my question, what was your name again?
Diane.
Diane, so when you said earlier the municipal powers and this and that, we get cheaper tax rates or our property taxes are lower. Was that a statement, or did I see that on your whiteboard when we were going through? When in fact, I never really looked at this stuff. I did some searching around. Ephrata Township has a cheaper millage rate than we do, and they have public power. Lititz Borough is cheaper than we do, and they have their own power system. So that's a term that gets used a lot, that we have cheaper taxes. But if you go to the county millage tax rate, we actually don't have cheaper taxes.
I don't believe that's incorrect. I think-
Okay, I mean, then explain it to me, please.
I think
'cause
the borough of Ephrata has the lowest tax rate of any borough in Lancaster County.
Lititz Borough.
No,
Cheaper.
Ephrata, we have less than Lititz.
I'd have to defer to the county millage rate for 2020 because it says they are lower.
They're not.
Let's just make sure that we're clear with
public power. They don't have public power.
They have choice of electric,
Yeah,
I'm
they
sorry.
have PPL in those
But
areas.
as we always hear, like, well, we're here, we make the decisions, but because of that, you have a cheaper tax rate. You know, in Lidditz Borough, if it's a $175,000 house, their taxes are $37.24 a year. In Ephrata Borough, we're $38.36. Now, if that millage rate's wrong, then you need to go to the county website, because that's where I was when I got this. But Ephrata Borough costs more than Lidditz Borough in millage rates. So, I mean, I'm just going by what I found on the county website, but we always hear that term come up here, that we have cheaper taxes. And, I mean, I'm gonna have to say, we don't. Warwick would be cheaper, now that's a township, it's not a borough.
Right.
But
We wanna compare.
Manheim
apples to
Borough,
apples.
I'm
We wanna
sorry?
compare apples to
Well,
apples.
so, okay, Manheim Borough,
Yeah.
they have choice of electric. We're at $38.36, they're at $39.30, that's $100. We'd have to go and see what their PU or PCA charges are on their electric bills, if they exist.
You should see what the water
Are
bill.
you-
But that's not what we're talking about here, water. I'm talking about, this always gets thrown out, like, we have cheaper taxes, we have cheaper taxes, but do a little research and you do the math, and, you know, there's a couple boroughs that are, well, Lidditz is a direct neighbor almost, and Manheim's not far off. Lidditz is cheaper, Manheim's just a hair more. So, that's a good argument, I guess, but, I mean, I don't know, it seems a little like, I wasn't doing the research a long time ago when I was told this. I always thought we just had amazingly cheap taxes when my friends in, back by the Green Dragon, if they had a house, you know, it was, whatever, they have a cheaper tax rate, is what I'm trying to say. But it's a township, not a borough. So, there I give you a couple of borough instances. And Akron Borough, by the way, is more than us. And I don't know why that is, but that's not my discussion or problem either.
Okay. Bob, and just educate me, but I mean, sometimes your tax rate's gonna be higher depending on if you don't have enough businesses to offset that though too, correct or no? Like, I look at Ephrata Township where they can, you know, they can expand more and have, you know, a bigger tax base, or Lidditz or Warwick Township with Rockledge and all those places out there, you know, a bigger tax base that maybe that offsets a little bit on, you know, Joe Homo and like you and me, Scott, I don't know, but I could be wrong.
Well, first of all, I looked it up. I'm looking at the municipal 2020, 2021 rates.
Okay.
Lidditz Borough is 2.0. We're looking at the municipal millage.
I was looking at the combined millage rates, like
Okay,
the
well,
school,
I'm looking at the municipal millage.
Okay.
So it's 2.0 and Ephrata is 1.76. So, you know, you can, when you got numbers, you can tweak them however you want them to sound.
sure, I just look at the one, like, if I live there,
Right.
I don't wanna know, oh, this is a specific thing, I wanna know what I pay in property taxes. I wanna be like, here's what the check you write to the local government. I don't know that it's a little bit to here and a little bit to there. I'm just Joe Schmo, taxpayer. So I look at the end result, the number that I pay.
You can't include the school taxes.
Well, if that's the case.
We have no control over the school taxes.
Okay.
If that's the case, then you're gonna look at every single borough. Denver Borough is 0.0 in municipal tax. I mean, you can't look at just
But
one
their total millage is
section.
24. So I mean, you know, I
The
mean.
total-
But you just said, you can only do
But
this.
I'm just talking to his point, but I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying.
What check do you write out?
Specifically
That's all people
broke down.
give, any, they don't care about anything, so what you're paying.
Denver Borough is 2.79. Conway
this
Township is 0.0. That's what I'm looking at.
They're hard to read, they're very small.
Yeah.
When you're looking at each individual number, yes, you can break down each individual column. And if you don't like what this column says, oh, I wanna look at the total.
Oh, I was just.
But we're gonna look at the total next time.
The total,
No,
so
we're
I'm
not
just
looking
following
at
the
it.
suit, right, okay.
We have
Does
no
anybody have
control
any-
over school taxes, so
Ms.
you
Martin.
can't ask this council to
I
answer.
completely understand.
Ms. Martin,
Yes.
I made a vow I'm gonna speak tonight,
Oh, God.
but I can't let this go undiscussed. I'm Mr. Wozniewski on that lawsuit, so trust me, I know what's going on here. Let's quit using the word, we got lower taxes. That's visible taxes. Ephrata has a ton of hidden costs. I call them hidden taxes. Congressman Bernstein in Western PA calls them hidden taxes. You can call them fees, you can call them whatever. For instance, cable TV, Ephrata Borough charges 5% of everyone's cable bill. 5%. You can go to many other boroughs that are a fraction over the posted taxes, they don't charge a nickel. Ephrata has the PCA on their electric bill, above and beyond rates, whenever they need it. That is commingled in with unregulated, unaccountable spending fund that the borough spends. That's a tax, that's a hidden tax. I would rather look at a community, because I've moved many times in my career before I retired. And before I move my kids and family into a community, I don't look at just their taxes. I want to see how much it costs to live in that town. If you put every one of Ephrata's fees, surcharges, and hidden costs together, we're not the utopia you keep telling people we are. I rest my case, that's all I want to say.
Okay, well, thank you.
How can citizens have more input, into the, decisions made?
Well, I think I'm seeing input.
Well, we're not voting on anything.
I see input, you're having conversations,
Right, right.
so I'm not sure I don't know what more we can do by have public meetings, listen to your comments. I think we're doing what we need to be doing as far as input, we're listening to what they're saying, and yes.
Yeah, I think, what you were saying earlier, that the work sessions, is there more discussion or more information out, what she was asking about, the information on the amendment? Is that when that's more discussed versus voted on?
So what happens is a committee meeting, which is mostly it's committee members that come to the committee meeting. So what the committee does is they vote to move things forward to full council. So at the work session, full council takes a look at everything we're looking at, and then they discuss it, and then they
Bring it to you guys.
yeah. So they bring it up to see, it's kind of like taking the temperature of everybody on council on a certain issue to see if they're for or against it. The committee is the one who decides to move it forward. If we had an item we decided we didn't want to move forward, it would just die right here. It would be brought to full council. So that's how that process works.
Okay, so if
works-
somebody's concerned about something, they should be involved in a work session.
Probably both, committee meeting and work session, but
Right.
work session is where we bring it up again to discuss. Sure,
Right.
certainly, yeah.
And if I could add to that, the proposed ordinance that we talked about this evening,
I know it was discussed before in previous.
well, but it will be advertised in a public newspaper, all right, 10 days prior to when Borough Council's expected to take action on it. And the specific language for the paragraph that I read to you will be in the ordinance, and it will be in the Ephrata Review. And let's see, it'll be next Wednesday.
Is there then a public comment period, or, in general, if you have something to be voted on, like the federal government, they have public comment periods, or?
The Borough Code requires us no less than 10 and no more than, I believe it's 30 or 60 days for an ordinance.
But what's the avenue for a citizen to respond?
You can come here and you can express your concerns, you can issue written comments to the borough manager, and that will be included as part of the agenda for council to consider.
Yes, go ahead.
I actually have a question for the PMEA, Diane. You had made mention that you have annual conferences each year. How do you get invited, or who is invited to those, and where are they held?
They're only for municipal members. We're an association, we're not required to have our conferences open to the public, so they are only for our membership.
Well, what is borough membership?
The borough itself, the council, the manager, the electric superintendent are the only ones that are invited.
So not borough council?
I said council.
Oh, council is invited.
Council, mayor, the officials, and the appointed and elected officials are the invitees, because they are the members of the association.
I've read that municipal utilities, municipal-owned utilities, can be run in two ways. They can be run by the borough council, or they can be run by an expert committee that, because the borough council is so busy with the parks and the curbsides and the traffic and the street lights and you know, how much time do they really have for this important issue? And so that, have you seen that, or are there any?
That does not exist in Pennsylvania, and I don't
So
think that's what the
you-
code actually provides.
You may be, are you talking about authorities, maybe municipal authority, like a sewer or water authority?
No, I'm
Those
talking
are,
about the way the electric utility is run.
okay, so for an electric utility, unlike a water or a sewer utility, for water or sewer, the borough could have an authority, like many other townships or other municipalities do. But for electric, it has to be the borough council, and in this case, you have a committee already designated for, I believe, that purpose, right?
Is that a Pennsylvania rule that it has to be the borough council?
It's borough code, yes.
And
it'd
they
be-
can't have expert input, or?
Well, they have expert input in the form of staff and their management and whoever else they choose to involve.
And members
Yeah.
to advocacy associations as well.
And most of the, I mean, with authorities and so forth, that's largely the argument is they have expertise or time to dedicate to those things, which is great. The committee structure is very similar though, in terms of boroughs. When they have committees of members, it's perfectly acceptable. But I'm not aware of any other alternative to that in the borough electric world.
And we're not, the ratepayers aren't considered investors.
No, the ratepayers would be citizens or ratepayers.
So we don't have any real ownership of the municipal structure.
Owner, not to the extent other than that you are influencing the members of your governing body through voting, showing up at meetings and providing public comment, the same as you would for any other hot button issue that might exist in a borough. Or any mundane issue, it doesn't have to be a hot button issue.
Right.
I mean, if the question is public input, then the answer is show up at a public meeting and provide your input, pay attention to all the notices that get put out, and vote in your municipal elections.
What year was PMEA founded?
Good question.
I don't know, it's like 30, 40 some years ago. I don't have it on the top of my head.
I can provide that if that's important, but,
Yeah, I can look.
And what year did the Borough of Ephrata join PMEA?
excuse me?
What year did the Borough of Ephrata join PMEA?
I think we joined PMEA probably in the mid-90s. I don't know what year that would be with.
And if the Borough of Ephrata decided it no longer wanted to be a part of PMEA, what sort of, is there some sort of contract agreement?
No, we're a membership association, so if you don't want to, if ever chooses not to be a member, they choose not to be a member. Then they don't have access to what we provide, but they can certainly choose not to be a member.
And is the approximately $35,000 a year that we pay, is that standard for most boroughs?
The membership dues are based on the size of the community in terms of meters.
So the more money that the electric company in town is earning, the more money you charge. That's what you're saying.
I think she's saying the more customers they have, the more.
No, that's
It's
pretty
a
much the
unit
same thing.
fee.
Right,
a
it's
unit
based
fee
on
Based
meters.
upon number of meters each community has.
But
So
the more
the
meters,
unit fee is the same for each community.
right, but the more meters a community has,
Yes.
the more potential electric is generated, the more revenue is generated within that community, the more money is paid in dues, in membership dues to an association.
It has nothing to do with the amount of electricity that's consumed. It has only
Available.
amount of meters.
Meters.
All right, so whether we have all residential customers and our consumption is lower, or if we had all industrial customers where our consumption might be more significant, we would still pay the same amount if the number of meters were the same.
I kind of understand the whole membership thing. So say a borough has 150,000 customers, one has 50,000. The $150,000 borough is gonna rely on association more than the 50,000. So there's gonna be more maintenance.
Right, but they would also be generating more electric. in
Well, that's
general.
on the borough.
Typically.
Yeah,
Right.
PMEA isn't taking anything on it.
Okay, do we have anything else new to bring up? Any other questions, any other new relevant?
I just have,
I need a little time then.
Pardon?
I said I'm gonna need some time at that pulpit right there.
Well, we have 9 minutes, so.
Well, I can come to the next meeting.
That's fine.
I mean, the next one in here. What is the next
The
meeting?
next meeting is
Public
public
safety.
safety.
Perfect, I'll speak there.
Okay, that's
I'm
fine.
dressed tonight, so here we are. I got some stuff to say, and I need about 5 or 10 minutes.
Well, I mean, you can have 5 minutes now if you'd like.
Oh, that'd be
to.
awesome.
Yeah, I prefer that, because when
Yeah.
we're talking public safety, we're talking public safety.
Well, I mean, I thought tonight was gonna be all about discussing the resolution and why solar doesn't work in the borough, but we did get to hear why you don't have to adhere to it, is what this meeting was about, I guess.
I think what this meeting was about was to get clear information on what we are allowed and not allowed to do.
All right, great.
The quick
So-
question I have before we start is,
Real quick.
so we're just under the borough code, that's it? The state borough code, no PUC?
Right.
Okay.
All right. So look, from the beginning, I argued that your ordinance that was supposed to be explained to you tonight didn't coincide with Pennsylvania law. And when you drive around, there's solar right outside the borough and no solar inside it. That we only have 3 residential solar things. It's not fair that we have to deal with,
We have more than just 3 solar customers. We have a list of our solar customers.
do you really? Wow, why was I told 3 then?
I don't read that.
Residential?
Yes.
All right, hold on. You're burning my time up.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry. Need a gavel up here, right? All right, so look, the whole time I've been looking at these laws, I've been looking too far. I've always thought, well, I'm not the same as my person in Ephrata Township or in the rest of Lancaster County. Why is that? Well, you guys are a horizontal monopoly, and you're allowed to be. And I've dropped that chapter 75 off, and I've given it to you at least on one occasion. Did you have a chance to read it, by the way?
I've read through it, yes.
Have you? Well, it's perfect. It's great. Because you're going to know the part that I'm going to read here next. And even though you don't associate as an EDC or a DSP or whatever, we're just going to take that part out. We're going to call you an electric company. An electric company shall provide, and this is Pennsylvania law, chapter 75, so you guys didn't know
What
this is.
section are you in?
I'm in section, oh boy. I'm in 7513. I'm going to be in subchapter J. I'm going to read J and K too. An EDC or DSP, an electric company for that matter, shall provide net metering at non-discriminatory rates identical with respect to rate structure, retail components, and monthly charges to the rates charged to other customers that are not customer generators on the same default service. An EDC, now we're into K, an EDC or DSP, or an electric company like yourself or Municipal Power, I'm going to assume, may not charge a customer generator a fee or other type charge unless that fee or charge would apply to other customers that are not customer generators. So, Pennsylvania is a non-discriminatory state. It's illegal to discriminate in Pennsylvania. Because of solar, I'm treated differently than my neighbors. And not my neighbors in Ephrata Township, or Manheim Township, or Warwick. None of them. I'm treated differently because of my neighbors that are next door to me. I gotta do extra things. I'd have to have an extra meter, second bill. I got a different rate structure. And your attorney, Mr. McManus, had asked before for some case law. So, recently in Montana, the Supreme Court, it's DA 19-0223, it's basically a solar company and some wind and power things against Northwestern Corporation of Montana, which is a company similar to this, a power company. Well, Montana's High Court ruled that a utility can't discriminate against solar energy. It's called rate discrimination. It's illegal. The Supreme Court said that. So there's your case law right there. And I brought it up earlier, if we allow electric companies to discourage solar use, is what has happened here in the borough, through rate discrimination, there'd be no purpose for PERPA or FERC. Why do those government agencies even exist to promote solar and keep electric companies in check? Good question, but you have the APES or whatever that was. But that's not the federal government. This is a federal statute. Gives you an alternative to fossil fuels. And, that's what PERPA and FERC are there for. So, with some case study and case law and Supreme Courts that have decided recently, within the past year, in Montana and federal law, you know, they prohibit discrimination. I'm sure that Pennsylvania does as well. PUC has a bunch of rules that you say you don't have to adhere to. But I am sure, inside the PUC, when it says anti-discrimination in Pennsylvania, you can't get away from that. You can't make me do something different than my neighbor does. That is Pennsylvania law. It's in that chapter 75, but I'm gonna bet that it's there for a reason, and that is probably the premise of that entire law, that chapter 75. So, you might want to check with your attorneys again on that, on discrimination. My name is Scott Shervine, resident of this town, and I'm discriminated upon because of solar. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Shervine, thank you for your comments. The only thing, I'm going to close with a comment, the only thing that I would like, and I've been asking you, this is probably the fourth time, is if you would provide us what our regulations say and what you wanted to say. And I've asked you 4 times for that, to be specific as to what you don't like specifically about our policy.
So it's
and you have not provided
that anymore, Linda.
So I don't know what else to do for you then.
No.
I don't know.
Well, no, it's totally simpler than that. I just covered it right there, so please hear me. Because of solar, I get treated differently than my next door neighbor. By definition, that is discrimination. It's called consumer discrimination. It's illegal in Pennsylvania. It's in that thing. You have it, read it.
I'm not sure how it can be discrimination if
Did you hear what I just said though?
Can I finish my sentence?
Sure.
With our presenter tonight, I think he did say that, or I'm sure he said that we don't even have to provide net metering policies.
Okay, well, how about
That's what you
discrimination?
said, right? So we don't even have to do that. So that we do that, we're doing that as a service to our customers. So within that confine, I'm not sure how that can be discriminatory.
So by your definition of it, since you don't have to provide that, if I ask for it, you're really not discriminating.
I don't see the correlation myself. I just don't see it.
Well, I mean, it would be right there. You would have to read it. It says in Pennsylvania, it does
I
not
guess my biggest
discriminate.
question, how I'd like to end the meeting is I've asked you specifically what you want our regulations to say versus what they say now, and you've yet to provide that, and until.
Well, I did,
until-
right there, chapter 75.
But we don't,
It
you
says
went
it.
around in a circle. Until we get specific information as to what our regulations say, what you would like them to say instead, I don't know what else we can do, because there's gonna be nothing further to add to this discussion. So,
Well, the discussion now has changed. You're discriminating against me. Consumer discrimination and rate discrimination. When you make your rates like they are, and no one uses solar, that's called rate discrimination. It's illegal. They proved it in Montana in the Supreme Court. Read that, study the case law, it's been done. When a company that's an electric company makes it tough for somebody to have solar, and they make the rates something that they wouldn't want, just as what is happening here, it's called rate discrimination. When I'm treated differently than my neighbor because of solar, it's discrimination. It says it right there in Pennsylvania law. We were just there. Now, you don't consider yourself an EDC or a DSP or whoever it is what it is. You're called the electric company as far as I'm concerned. But it doesn't matter. If you discriminate upon me, that's pretty serious in Pennsylvania. So we're not ever going to discuss anymore the fact of like what we need to change. You need to change it where I'm treated the same as my next door neighbor, and you're changing it because of discriminatory laws.
Okay, do we have any other comments? Yes, Mr. Richard.
So I have a question. Mr. Wakefield, would you have any comments on this conversation that you care to?
Actually, before you do that,
No, excuse me. I would like to let him finish that, please.
I'm just curious, Attorney, if you have any comments. This is a little bit much, the terminology I don't buy into is being said. Do you have any comments on what you're hearing here, just general comments?
Yeah, I do. In terms of the case law, I would just dispute the application of that particular case because it's Montana, not Pennsylvania. Chapter 75 are the regs that I alluded to earlier in my presentation, which would be applicable to the IOUs, not to the borough. You do have certain restrictions, but not within chapter 75.
Some of the terminology being used, discrimination, some of these buzzwords which are kind of inflammatory, I think they're being kind of cherry picked here and used, and your thoughts here, when I listened to your presentation here, I know yearly, we look at our rates to our corresponding neighbors, we look at our tax rates, we look at our expenses for transmission, electric, and I know we're always either lowest or real close to the bottom. And whether we have the lowest tax rates or money is put back by the electric division into lowering our taxes, that is a fact of life. So I think we're being as good a steward in the borough as we can of our money. It's staying in the borough, it's going in the same fund which pays all the bills. So effectively, globally, it does keep the taxes in the borough lower, because it's not going outside to privately owned companies, which are paying dividends and stocks. This is staying in the borough. So that's where some of these conversations, these comments are kind of, to me, throwing at the wall to stick and just.
I did not review every element of your rate structure, but what I did see, I did not understand to be discriminatory. And I understand that while there may be some preferences that exist for a different rate structure or payback structure or billing structure when it comes to net metering, there's no legal impediment to what the borough is doing now in terms of how that's set up. And it is not discriminatory as far as I can tell.
Well, you could even use the word discriminatory if you charge more for commercial customers than
Correct.
residential. We can move the line all over the place. I think we have fair, reasonably set rates, and there are costs when people generate to put them out on the line, and those are not fake charges, they're actual charges, which everybody across the United States is paying for and becoming higher all the time. So I know we try to monitor this on a yearly basis, if not more often. We have the PCA to make adjustments as necessary during the year, but we're as transparent, we pass through all of our expenses and savings back to the taxpayer.
And you do go through a rate study, I believe. Is that
Cost of
correct?
service study.
Yeah, I think each time you change your rates, you've gone to that cost of service study, which is validating.
Okay, well, that, I'm gonna adjourn the meeting.